Hello, everyone. So at Minespider, as you know, we are working on battery passports and digital product passport implementation. So as part of those efforts and activities, we are getting a lot of questions on how battery passports should be implemented, how is the regulation affecting different participants, and what needs to be done by who. So in order to address those efforts and make sure the wider public is also aware, we are actually going to be recording a few YouTube videos where we tend to address these questions and provide you with some of the answers based on our experience. So we see that there is a lot of moving towards electrification in the usage of batteries, especially the vehicle sector. And we've noticed that there is obviously a lot of regulation starting to support that, especially on an EU level, and other countries are following. So in light of that electrification movement and the increased usage of batteries, the need for a more stringent, let's say, regulation where the bodies on a higher level or the countries will ensure that the customers or end users are using safe products has emerged. So as a result of that, we have, for example, in the EU battery regulation as a way to have more compliant, more safe, more circular products on a battery level. So I would say they're the all the battery supply chain stakeholders, let's say we can divide them in directly impacted and indirectly impacted. The ones who are placing the products or the batteries on the EU market are the ones who are directly impacted. So in this case, it can be OEMs, energy storage producers, or importers or distributors from other countries. So the biggest, let's say, the biggest chunk of the responsibility lies on their side. Because they will need to be reporting directly in the format of the battery passport, but they also need information from all the other participants in their supply chain, which are indirectly affected. So, just to name a few for context, that can be the cell supplier, it can be the raw material supplier, the cathode supplier, anode supplier, and so on. So, we would say that, yeah, directly impacted the ones who are placing the batteries on the market, but indirectly everyone within their supply chain. So for the battery passport specifically, basically it addresses the whole life cycle of a battery. So the information there is basic informational requirements, the technical details of the battery, but it also strengthened now with sustainability information, information stemming from the carbon footprint details, the due diligence details, and of course, dynamic data coming from the battery management system. And all of this, especially the last part, is in support to tackling that end of life of batteries and how the battery will be treated after that, whether it can be repurposed instead of going directly in recycling and so on. So the regulation already came in force in August 2023. So after that, there are a couple of key milestones that companies need to take into consideration. So basically, the first one that is being applicable starting from February 2025 is the carbon footprint calculation. That is specifically covering electric vehicle battery types. So companies producing electric vehicle batteries will need to take that in account and already should have those details since we are in 2020. After that, there was initially one requirement for due diligence obligations that was set for August 2025. That was also recently rescheduled. So the new deadline for the due diligence obligation for companies now is postponed to August 2027. And this also postponement includes updates in terms not only of the date, but also of the threshold. So what that means in this case that previously the threshold for companies who were subject to this due diligence obligation was set at 40 million euros of net turnover for the previous financial year. This time it has been adjusted to 150 million euros. So any companies within above this range would be subject to the due diligence obligation starting from August 2027. So these two I would say are more challenging because those are requiring input from the whole supply chain, very upstream up until the downstream parts. So now with this, we imagine companies are already working on it, so they will have more time to complete the details. So a lot of interaction between the supply chain members And with this push, we expect that we should have more concrete results by August 2027 on this part. So it's a combination of data and that is set either as static and dynamic, and that has a different data sharing layers. So some of the information is to be public and some of it set as private. We're still awaiting on the delegating and implementing acts on how the private information should be divided, who gets to see it, or how to act with it. And basically, companies should start working on collecting all the details. As of now, they are separated into a couple of different sections. So starting from February 2027, every battery should have a battery passport record. So the first requirement that comes in force is the carbon footprint calculation. So carbon footprint calculation also requires details from all supply chain members. So as companies, our suggestion is as companies are doing this, they should also in parallel be doing the due diligence if they are within that threshold, because they are actually going through the whole supply chain. So when we look at the timeline of what comes first, because there are different portions of the regulation that are coming mandatory at certain dates, the first thing is the carbon footprint, depending on the category of battery. Then in parallel, if you're subject to, you should be working on the due diligence aspect so that you can have those externally, let's say, dependent aspects covered for the battery passport in 2027. And of course, in the meantime, aligning data or coordination internally within company departments to obtain the remaining of the details of the battery passport, which belong to the general information category, the performance and durability details, circularity details, and so on. But those, I would say, have a more narrow scope and can be something that can be done within the companies itself. So the challenges will come mostly from the interaction with the wider supply chain network. So for example, companies, there are different cases. So a certain company who will be the economic operator who has the responsibility to issue this battery passport might not be ideally vertically integrated company. So they might source the cells from one place, or other parts from different companies and so on. So they have more complex or complicated supply chain. So in their case, what they would need to do is start timely organizing how they can make sure they have all the details that should go in a battery passport. So our suggestion is to, if not already started, for companies to initially and engage in performing a gap analysis. So gap analysis will reveal where there are details which are missing, where there might be coordination needed internally, or where there might be information required from external supply chain partners. These gaps then can be used to transform a plan of action that companies can dive into to obtain the missing pieces. Considering that supply chains are very complex, and usually not every company has information on their suppliers below tier 1. This is a good point where anyways they would need to do the carbon footprint details or the supply chain due diligence parts so they can start uncovering their supply chain maps, coordinating within their suppliers and sub-suppliers so that the certain aspects that are dependent on external supply chain feedback, they can put into context and obtain on time. For the rest, which might be, let's say, alignment internally between departments or confirming information on who gets to handle which part of data. Those are something that we would say we can say they are lighter because they can be within the scope of the company. But then if we look about the technology aspect and how this information will feed in the battery passport, we can also touch upon on the integration part or ask what type of systems a company might be using. Are you using manual details? Are you using some automated software systems that need to pull the data from one system and add it in the battery passport solution provider and so on? So that's why, even though it might sound like, yes, it's easy, we have the data. Once you start uncovering details, it is not as easy as it seems. So starting with the gap analysis, I would say identify the points that might be needing more information and start acting on them now would be my advice. Because even though we think it's February, it's 2027, and there is a lot of time. When you are dependent on feedback from external parties, things can go slower, especially considering the fact that here a lot of information can be considered sensitive. So when we're speaking about composition of materials or dynamic data or so on, these are information and details that not everyone is prone to discuss very easily. We can see there is a change, a shift in the mindset, but still, that's why we say it's better to start earlier and slower than wait until the last minute and be non-compliant.